Horizon Chance, Reacts, and this is Germany Could Not Win World War II by the channel Potential History. A look into why the Germans could not pull a win out of the war with the realities they found themselves in. Yeah, I think, Nazis wouldn't have won in World War II basically because they had a massive fuel and resources issues. They were way too ambitious, right? They spontaneously just attacked after whatever preparation they could and just attacked everybody, right? They took over France. They wanted to, they're trying to attack Britain and bombarded Britain lots of time, trying to take Britain. Probably that's what their goal was. After France, and probably after they take over Russia. After they take over Russia after France was already occupied by Nazis. Now they want to take over Russia, and then they're going to go after Britain, and so long and so forth. Yeah, they wanted to do everything basically. Yeah, that's not a joke, especially just for one country. Fuel issues would rise up like it did. So I think they were way too ambitious. One guy taking on everybody was not going to work ever. So yeah, it's that, and also their vision and their ideology kind of limited them, I guess. So yeah, let's watch this one. Remember, people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the Rick Sunday, there's a link in the description. Check out the cards for plays, check out the end cards, and yeah, let's watch it.
There, I've finished fine-tuning my what-if machine. It can answer any what-if question accurate to within 1/10 of a plausibility unit. Who wants the machine to show them an alternate reality?
Oh, I want to know
if Germany wins if Hitler stops making decisions.
Who else has a question for the what-if machine? I have one.
Do they win if they mass-produce the mouse tank?
Oh, the big tank.
Make
Nope.
that machine show me what would happen
if they took Moscow.
Ah.
That's so plausible, I can't believe it.
People love rooting for the underdog. These stories strike a chord with us at a very basic level, and you can tell this by how popular these stories are in media. This also translates to real-world stories, although real life does not have a plot that always turns in the underdog's favor. So there's this kind of romanticism connected to fighting for a lost cause that a lot of people assign to a lot of real-world groups. One of these you see talked about a lot is the German army in World War II, that if only dumb Hitler hadn't been in charge, or if different choices were made, that the war would have turned out different. And a lot of these arguments seem to hold water on the surface, but upon
No, not really. I don't care how Hitler was making fucked up decision. That was his whole ideology. Without Hitler, how does even World War II work, right? Okay, I guess people are saying, what if Hitler stopped making decisions in the midway? Then their whole structure falls apart, right? Hitler was the thing that they cling on to. Hitler spew out his ideas and people basically cling on to that. Hitler wasn't the original one, basically. It was the whole group of people during this time, Nazis basically. But still, Hitler was at the center of it, right? Without Hitler at the helm, none of this works, right? Without him being at the helm, people would not fight as hard as they did. He was basically the, morale guy of the Nazis. Without him, it really doesn't work. First of all, one country, Germany, taking over everybody, even though I know the history of them, Prussia, and how they are military straight and everything. I understand that, but even at the scale that they did, right, taking over France and just, being that powerful, wouldn't have worked without Hitler. So what if Hitler was not there? Then the Nazis would have fallen apart. No way it would have worked. You can't really put it onto the, paper shit and just, put in stats and think like if Hitler didn't make this decision, it would have worked. Yeah, but without Hitler, none of it would have worked. He was pretty crucial to the whole thing, whole ideology, whole, Nazis as whole.
Reflection mostly miss the point or do not make a significant enough change to sway anything. These are my favorite how Germany could have won scenarios and how they're wrong.
Just take Moscow. This is the most funny thing, right? Because it implies that, if you just take Moscow, Russia's done, right? Russia falls down. That's how easy Russians are. Yeah, Napoleon thought the same thing, right? We saw the Napoleonic War. He went all the way in, just like Hitler mentality, didn't prepare much afterwards. Winter. Before winter, we'll be, we'll have Russia with us. We'll be living inside some kind of a, Russian building and just chilling there. Because we would have been warm, because we would have taken over Moscow. That doesn't work, right? Russians burned Moscow and just ran away when Napoleon came. Napoleon did take the Moscow, but it didn't achieve nothing. Russians were still there. Then winter came and then the disaster, everybody knows it. So just taking over Moscow doesn't do shit.
I hear this one all the time, that if the Germans had just driven onto Moscow and taken it, the Russians would have capitulated. But it is rarely backed up with evidence as to why. Even in the memoirs of German generals after the war, they constantly mentioned that the drive to Moscow would have meant victory in the East. And I think the reason for this is that they model the Russian campaign after the French campaign. In the French campaign in 1940, the French surrender once Paris is cut off from its forces and looks like it's about to fall. Using this model, a lot of people think that the exact same would apply to Russia. The only problem with this is Russia is a whole different animal, both politically and geographically. Stalin was going to put every man, woman, and child in the Soviet Union between him and the advancing Germans, and this is exemplified by the way the Red Army fought the war, often trading casualties for time. So if Moscow was taken, sure, it's a political and also logistical defeat, given that the rail network was centered around it.
Yeah, at the Napoleonic times, Russian leader wasn't even crazy like Stalin. So, I mean, that's another layer to it. Like, Stalin would have happily just throw his people, civilians, as casualties just to stop Germans. That's another layer to it. And during the Napoleonic times, I think they ran away to St. Petersburg. Peter the Great made sure that there is another place that people can run from Moscow to. So, yeah, no, it wouldn't have worked.
But no way do I think Stalin is just going to shrug and say, well, we tried, after Moscow was taken.
Seriously.
And with that, we would probably see the Soviet Union fighting to the bitter end, just like the Germans did in reality. This is also backed up by real-world history from Napoleon's Russia campaign in 1812, where he went on to take Moscow but still lost the war. Russia is such a large and vast country that they have the ability to trade casualties.
I don't know, I'm imagining, Hitler basically like, yeah, we take the Moscow and then Russia falls. Then they take the Moscow and then Stalin just, message him. Do you know the definition of insanity? I'm a loco essay.
And land at a higher rate than any other country can. And therefore, the normal rules of war, such as taking the capital and ensuring victory, do not apply.
Are they not seeing this?
Another commonly heard point is that Hitler made terrible decisions and he should have just listened to his generals. Now, I'm not here to defend Adolf Hitler, he's a crazy genocidal maniac, let's not make two ways about it. But this isn't always the case. For example, Hitler and the High Command were all in agreement on invading Russia. They all very much wanted to, in their eyes, destroy communism and save Germany, as Hitler laid out in his book. But once this effort was undertaken, Hitler and his generals began to disagree at times on what moves needed to be made. And once the war is over, many generals in their memoirs begin to claim that Hitler made all the bad decisions, and that if he had just listened to them, the war would have been won.
Yeah, okay.
And one example of this I already hinted at in the former point. Hitler's generals were convinced that taking Moscow would end the war for many erroneous reasons I listed previously. For Hitler, Moscow was a general direction in which to head, but was not the final objective. For him, the resources in the Ukraine and the oil fields beyond were a much more important target. And given Germany's oil shortages, this is a good example of where Hitler was wrong.
See, that shows you that Hitler knew better than his generals. Like, generals just thinking stupid. First of all, Hitler probably knows that just taking Moscow doesn't do shit, because I realized what Napoleon did and what happened to him. He probably knows that. But he's only looking at the Russia like how a wolf sees somebody else, right? Like, I need to feed. They needed resources, and they saw Russia and just, Russia, Ukraine, basically, and they just saw that all the resources they can give. So that's what Hitler was seeing, because he needed to take resources to continue, otherwise he falls, which actually happened, right? I mean, the way he just started the war with whatever resources he could, whatever he achieved was already way too much than he should have. He got lucky in certain places, probably, sure, you can think it like that. But his approach was already way too much from the start, right? He was eventually going to reach to this point where he's out of resources. One guy taking on everybody like that was, bound to fail. But he was still trying to take resources. That's why he tried to take Russia, not just to take Moscow, so the war is over. And, it's stupid to think that, Hitler didn't listen to his general. He probably did, but he doesn't have to agree on everything, right? It's not a democracy in Hitler's case. And, Hitler probably was a bit smarter than his generals. So, Hitler and his, effed upness, basically, also saw things like that. Like, I need resources, not to take Moscow just to, win the war against Russia, because that wouldn't have worked.
Right, and his generals were wrong. And actually, a lot of Hitler's so-called mistakes start to make a whole lot more sense once you put it into the context of Germany's fuel shortages. And if you want more information on this, Tick did an excellent video on Germany's oil problem that you should really check out. Another example of this sentiment being wrong is Operation Citadel in 1943. Hitler's generals convinced him that an attack on the Kursk Bulge would cripple the Red Army and renew Germany's initiative in the war. Hitler saw this plan as very flawed, though, famously saying, "Every time I think about Operation Citadel, my stomach turns over." And seeing how poorly this turned out for the Germans, his premonition was eerily correct. Now, if this was the caricature of Hitler always overriding his generals that is commonly seen, Citadel would have been called off before it was launched. Now, these are just two quick examples, and yes, there are times, especially later in the war, where Hitler overrules his generals with poor decisions. The Battle of the Bulge comes to mind. But early in the war, when these decisions really count, Hitler is many times making the right decisions when overruling his generals, or going along with them in agreement of a common goal.
Yeah.
So, Hitler should have just listened to his generals and he would have won the war, is a moot point. Because
Seriously.
many times he did, and his generals were wrong, and many times he didn't, and he turned out to be right.
It's all Adolf Hitler, Adolf Hitler, Adolf Hitler.
Seriously, I mean, there's a reason the guy was in charge, right? He wasn't some moron. He had the military mind. So they're just saying that. I mean, basically he was, ruled by force, but, he overruled his general lots of times. But, it's one guy cannot control everything. That's the true everywhere, whether it's king or some dictator like Hitler. So, even though he opposed certain decisions, certain things still, happen because his generals wanted them. And he probably gave in to that because he knows he can't just alienate his generals. But still, I mean, there are lots of things, like he said, Citadel and things like that, where his generals were wrong. And he knew this was a disaster and turned out to be a disaster.
This is actually a point I used to subscribe to.
Just build more
a
stuff.
very honest
Is that
critique
easy?
of the German war economy is that it was not on the right footing. And people make this argument usually saying things like, Germany should have just made more Panzer IVs instead of pouring resources into the Tiger. Or, Germany should have built the Luftwaffe back up so they could regain air superiority. And I will give you that the German war economy in many places was an absolute nightmare. John Parshall does an excellent lecture on tank production in World War II and really highlights how backwards the German production process was for armored vehicle manufacturing, and mentions how that knowledge can be applied to other types of war manufacturing. And although once Speer takes over, production is streamlined to a degree, and munitions and weapons production goes up year by year, it's not near where it needs to be to fight this attritional war. So obviously, the solution is to just streamline production, sort of how you see in the American model, and this would have given Germany a better chance in the war. Although this is a good criticism, it misses the core issue. The biggest thing Germany was running low on from 1942 onward is, as I mentioned before, oil. And larger numbers of tanks and planes wouldn't be any good if there was no fuel to run them. Also, Germany was having manpower shortages as early as 1942 or 43, and along with fuel to run these machines, you need people to crew them. These are just two issues that cannot be remedied by streamlining production. At a certain point, Germany is just going to be out of oil and out of men.
Yeah.
And no amount of additional tanks or planes would operationally be possible.
What's the matter? Run out of gas?
Kinda embarrassing.
It's really stupid to say, just make more stuff. Yeah, that's it. There you go. Problem solved. Just make more stuff. It's that easy, right? I mean, who cares about the resources, manpower, oil, and everything?
This is another point that deceptively seems to make a lot of sense, as Germany was crushed by a two-front war. It stands to reason that if Japan and Germany through their alliance had coordinated an attack on Russia, they would have won. And that may honestly be true. A big boost to the defense of Moscow came after Russian troops from Siberia were sent west after the Russo-Japanese Non-Aggression Pact. The only problem with this is that coordination did not and was never going to happen. Germany and Japan were allies by circumstance and shared no real common goals with each other. And in fact, they're operating in opposition to each other at times. German training of Chinese troops in the 30s as they were fighting the Japanese is a direct example of this. In short, neither side was going to stick out its neck for the other. In fact, Russia as a common enemy was probably the only instance in which they would have, and even then they did not. The reason for Japan not wanting to do this is mostly colored by the Japanese experience against the Soviets at the Battle of Konkangal, please forgive my pronunciation, where the Red Army gave the Imperial Army a very bloody nose in an undeclared border conflict. This incident convinced the Japanese to not go through with any action that would provoke the Soviet Union, as they did not want war with them, since they were already fighting China and would soon be fighting the United States. This avoidance of provoking the Soviet Union went far enough that during the war in the Pacific between Japan and the United States, the Japanese refused to sink any U.S. merchant ships headed to the Soviet Union. So, the Japanese attacking the Soviet Union directly flies in the face of the intentions and characteristics of the Japanese High Command, to the point where it strays out of potential history,
kill yourself,
into the realm of fantasy.
You have screwed me again.
Japan.
Yeah, so basically Japan is not stupid, right? I mean, if they are fighting China and they are taking things into Pacific, knowing full well that this will basically invoke, cause USA to attack them as well, that's already two front. Now they're going to make Russia their enemy. The thing that happened to Germany would have happened to Japan like that if they would have done that. So no way they would have gone against Russia in the Soviet Union at that point, right? So they were, China, USA, that's already way too much in their hand. They're not going to test things by, involving another major power as Soviet Union.
This is my favorite one. If they had just made insert ridiculous design here,
Okay, this is just stupid, right? Look at this tank compared to this. What was the name? I forgot the name. I remember watching this somewhere like Dark 5 video or something. This is ridiculously big tank. First of all, it's impractical, right? I mean, a childish version of us will think, oh, look at those tanks. That tank can basically tear a city apart, right? No, it's just way too big, right? It's people can see it, enemies can see it. It's not going to move fast because it's big tank. Yeah, I get it, the armor is big, but that's not enough, right? It has a real disadvantage. There's a reason why people don't make that big tank even today.
This is my favorite one. If they had just made insert ridiculous design here, the war may have gone differently. And it's the idea that this thing, or this thing, or this thing would somehow have single-handedly lengthened the war. And there are a few fan favorites for pics of these. The one I see most often being the Mouse, the ridiculous 200-ton behemoth that in reality would have been awesome target practice for Allied fighter bombers, and something for Allied soldiers to gawk at once it had run out of fuel and had to be abandoned. Or German jet aircraft, that although cutting edge and superior to what the Allies had, still couldn't have been applied in a large scale due to the aforementioned fuel and personnel problems.
Resources.
And the list for these things goes on and on. A personal pet peeve of mine in this category...
They had ridiculous idea for things. Some of them were way too over the top even at today's standard. You can find lots of, declassified intel here and there where Nazis were, trying to, make something that was ridiculously overpowered and things like that here and there. That bell thing comes to my mind, the earthquake device or whatever. Those were never verified, but sure, it could make sense. They were trying something like that because Nazis were really effed up. They were finding effed up technology, but in the end, those are all impractical because they didn't have resources to do anything. That's the thing, right? Nazis could have done something if they had resources, but they can't have resources because the way they approached this war from the start, they were about to run out in any scenario, right? I don't know how they didn't see that. I don't know how Hitler didn't see that before starting the war. Like, if I do this and just show aggression immediately out of the box like this and attack everybody, I'm going to be out of resources very fast because war is going to move faster, right? I'm not going to have that much time to gather that much resources to fight from all the fronts, east and west and everywhere.
Is the what-if question about the German atomic program, and the claim that if they had applied themselves, the Germans could have come up with an atomic weapon first.
Yes, scientists were not with them,
This notion, though, just like that of Japan invading Russia, very quickly falls into the category of fantasy, once looked at for three main reasons. One, many of Germany's top scientists were expelled in the 30s for being Jewish, automatically limiting German atomic capabilities.
All the German scientists were basically went to America and worked on the Manhattan Project there, right? And those were German scientists. There's a reason why they were in America and not Germany, right? Hitler didn't want them there. So how the fuck he was going to develop, atomic bomb?
And actually, many of these scientists went on to work in the American nuclear program. So to make this win scenario work, you automatically have to make the Nazis tolerant of Jews, which is not going to happen. Two, the German atomic program is all but cancelled by 1942.
He started the war with attacking Warsaw, killing Jews. Now he's suddenly going to be tolerant of them? That's not going to work.
Speer put it, we got the view that the development was very much at the beginning. The physicists themselves didn't want to put much into it. Which works into my third point, that Hitler saw atomic science as Jewish science, and pointed the focus of German development towards conventional weapons. So we're not even talking about an atomic race between the US and Germany, as it was barely being pursued by the Germans. And to give a what-if scenario about it would fly directly in the face of what Hitler stood for. And this gets into the bigger problem with this question, that even if Germany does produce these wonder weapons and extends the war, it's only going to extend it long enough to be the first country to get nuked, due to the Germany first policy of the Allies.
Are you making a
Jet plane?
or a remote control that can turn you into
Super soldier?
or is it just another dumb
Tank?
Now these are just a handful of points that people bring up when talking about how Germany could have won, but there are many more that I didn't go into that are equally baseless, such as the Germans should have and could have invaded England, even though the Kriegsmarine would not be able to support a large amphibious attack, and the much larger Royal Navy would have probably sunk the invading force before it even reached the shores.
Yeah.
Or that Barbarossa should have taken place.
Hitler didn't care about the sea weapons because of that, right? Bismarck was a one odd thing, and even that, he wasn't sure of that. Because Royal Navy was so powerful, he didn't want to do anything with the, basically naval attacks because of how powerful Royal Navy was.
Earlier, even though it wasn't really the winter or the rainy season that stopped the Germans, it was a lack of supplies that needed to be brought up. For more info on that, check out this lecture by David Stahill. You'll see people bringing up scenario after scenario that bends reality and character motivations very widely to craft a scenario that Germany could win. But here's my point. Germany would not have won World War II no matter what way you slice it. The fact of the matter is, this is a country that is too small and too short on resources to take on the three largest world powers at once, especially given the erroneous actions and motivations they have. Basically, the Germans dealt themselves a bad hand and played it poorly. And the only way that's going to change is if you bend time and space to their liking with the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. All things that are not going to happen in reality.
Yeah, so basically it's that, Germany went against the world massive powers, and, it was immediate, not slowly build up to it, immediate attack and immediate world war. Of course, they were going to, go out of resources, and even if they had found resources, I still don't believe Germany would have won because they're still one entity against many major powers. So yeah, and this is Germany Could Not Win World War II Part 2 by the channel Potential History, a follow-up to my previous video on how Germany could not win the Second World War. People said in the comments that this video wasn't planned, but he made it because all the people in the comment were still arguing things about him, like how Germany could have won. Yeah, to me, Germany winning even with everything aligned towards them is still a far-fetched thing just because they're one nation at the center of the Europe trying to attack all sides. It's never going to work. So let's watch this one. Let's see what this is. A 14-minute video. It's even bigger than his original one. So I guess there are many topics people raise. I guess he's going to talk about here. It's going to be fun. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe. Check out the reaction. There's a link in the description. Check out the cards over playlist. Check out the link cards. And yeah, let's watch it. Oh, Medal of Honor. Oh, I used to play that game a lot.
Excellent work with the German Miss, Powell. Here's to hoping better sources will be used in the future. However, our intel has picked up reports of continued resistance in the comment sections. Mentions of Dunkirk and who not to invade seem widespread. We will be dropping you directly into the comment section with your primary objective being to root out these myths. Be cautious, though. Reports indicate that the Wereroos will be armed with Cold War-era memoirs and David Irving books. Godspeed, Lieutenant.
What the hell? Oh, he made it custom. Look at it. This is the entire letter. Most people probably just glide past that, doesn't even read it. Damn.
This video is brought to you by Dashlane. Stay secure online and never forget a password again. More on that later. So you may recall around 6 months ago, I made a video about how due to Germany's lacking in the population, industrial, and raw materials sectors, they could not have pulled out a victory in the war they started in 1939. And it sorta got out of hand.
I think we should read the comments.
The other day, as I was reading the comment section there, I found that, along with some people agreeing with me, there were a lot of dissenting opinions of yet more ways that people thought the final victory could be achieved. And I am here today to respond to them. And also probably clear up what I meant at the end of the last video, talking about limited use of alternative history. Here are a few more ways Germany could not have won World War II. One thing I have seen brought up a few times is that if Hitler had not
What was that? Wait a second.
One thing I have seen brought up a few times is that if Hitler had not let the British Expeditionary Force get away at Dunkirk, that later the troops could not be used during Operation Overlord and thus no Western Front, with the implication that the German
Wait a minute. I don't think Dunkirk had that many soldiers. It was few 100,000, right? I mean, yeah, that is a good enough number, but that's not the war-changing numbers, if I remember correctly.
troops could have been sent east to stop the Soviets. This, however, has two problems. Firstly, the BEF was not simply allowed to leave France as this narrative suggests. In Mein Kampf, Hitler does speak highly of the British at times and suggests that they could be a potential ally, but this is clearly without a strong grasp of British culture and political policy, and was always discussed with Germany being above Britain and having them be administrators of the Reich, but only if they could shake their, quote, Jewish influence. Furthermore, he realized that Britain was against his intentions in the East and would become a barrier there. All this being said, by the time of the invasion of France, Britain was definitely an enemy, and Hitler was doing them no favors. So then,
yeah, first of all, Germany sharing power and being ally of Britain just feels just no, right? I don't think Hitler would have ever done that. Sharing things is not Hitler's part, I guess. And also Britain, basically, oh, there is Hitler, there's Nazis, I guess we can just basically co-rule the Europe or whatever, we two biggest power, obviously implied that if British goes with the Nazis, Russia and Soviet Union falls. Yeah, Britain is not doing that either, right? I mean, there is no scenario where I can think Britain's like, okay, I guess we're with the Nazis. And Nazis like, okay, we'll let the British go because they're allied. That is not happening, ever.
Then why Dunkirk? Well, this was an operational failing, not a peaceful gesture. On May 15, 1940, the Germans broke through the French 2nd and 9th armies and steamed ahead night and day, thanks in part to some tablet boys, towards the coast.
Although these gains what was the heroin or cocaine? What was that? In the World War II they used that.
Good for the Germans, the mechanized forces were quickly running out of supplies and were leaving their flanks exposed, which opened them to being cut off, the result of which could cause ruin for the German plans. It is at this point a nervous Hitler, being counseled by Generals von Kluge and von Rundstedt, gave a halt order to secure the flanks and allow the exhausted panzer divisions to refit. Check out this video by Mark Gurges for more. Upon the halt, our favorite drug-addled flyboy Goering promised the Luftwaffe could destroy the British at Dunkirk, and although he failed, I would hardly call the actions of the Luftwaffe just letting the British go. With thousands being killed, over 200 ships being sunk, over 100 planes shot down, and the loss of all the BEF's equipment, Hitler even realized that the halt was an error and resumed the attack while the evacuation was underway, and it was only successful due to the brave French soldiers that held out until it was complete. But even if he had let them go, there are still more problems asserting that this means a German victory in the war.
Yeah, first of all, there's no way, Hitler let them go in any means. It was really bloody all around, right? And Hitler basically, obviously, let the Panzer Division said to, halt because they were clearly just speeding, they just were running towards them. Obviously, this opens up a flank, like he said. I mean, you can't, one division cannot just run like it's like, to take a lots of drugs and just run like hell, running all the way to Britain, I guess. That's not going to work, right? All sides have to move forward, otherwise the flank is open, everybody can trap you.
Britain had to rearm all the soldiers evacuated, which is a huge loss and took some time. This force, when returned to England, was not in any way ready to turn around and invade France, although the troop reserves were good to have if Germany decided to invade. But they were not in fighting condition for a long time. But most importantly, Britain is not the only nation present at D-Day. A combined landing force of American, British, and Canadian forces, along with smaller groups from other countries, landed and fought on the Western Front. Although the troop loss, if Dunkirk had failed, may have limited Britain's number of troops, the United States, having only mobilized about 9% of its population in the course of the war, could have very realistically filled in the gaps as it did in reality with the British equipment losses. But all of this still doesn't take into account where the real war is being fought, in the East. The German army will be decidedly on its back foot after Kursk, and the Soviets have massive offensives planned in 1944 regardless of what the Western Allies do. Would the defeat of Germany have taken longer without the Western Front opening? Of course it would. But by 1944, the Soviets have a decisive upper hand and will push the Germans back to Berlin. So to say the war could have been shifted if the British had 300,000 fewer troops ignores the reality of what the Germans were truly up against by 1944.
At the scale they were fighting wars from all sides, 300,000 soldiers would have been a great loss and strategic loss at certain points. Probably would have gained some time, the Nazis would have gained some time somewhere. This is not enough for Germany to win, basically. See, Hitler lost from the start the way he started the war from the invasion of Poland, right? First of all, Germany is at the center. There is Soviet Union at side, and UK, France, and obviously US in the distance is in the middle of things. Look, only way I can see Hitler having some chance of winning is him being a bit political, right? A bit strategic at the start of the war. He doesn't just point blank start the war and invades Poland. He doesn't do that, but slowly takes over territories here and there in Africa or whatever to make sure he has proper resources than he had at the time, right? He expands his German empire slowly without suddenly opening wars like everybody, panicking everybody. He slowly takes over places, and then he suddenly attacks Poland and every place with having 3 times as resources than they had. Then I can see somewhat he has a chance. But even then, look, here's the thing. Britain is not easy to just take over, right? It's an island. And British Navy is just like, yeah, you can't just walk up to Britain and just occupy it like they did the France. So that wasn't happening. So if you leave Britain out, eventually they would attack Soviet Union, because, how we saw in the Hitler video from Oversimplified, communism was opposite of Nazism, right? When Hitler was rising rising through the ranks, there was 2 divide in the German population: far left, which was communism; far right, which was Nazism. So it was kind of opposite of what Nazis were. So I don't see ever communism and Soviet Union and Hitler Nazi basically working together just for the long distance. No, Hitler would have attacked communism always, right? They blame communism and Jews for all the problems. So Hitler, just to appease the German people, because what ideas he pushed through, like how it's fault of communism and Jews, he was going to attack Soviet Union regardless. So if he attacks Soviet Union without taking down Britain, which he can't do, like I said, it's not easy. So he had both sides to fight anyhow, right? If he attacks Britain, there is United States. Like, United States will be there to be as Britain's ally, because they can't let Britain fall down like that. So Britain and United States is always there. So if he attacks Britain, United States will be there, and he has a massive, attack in front of him. He attacks Soviet Union, Britain and United States would join like they did, because, this is becoming too much. If Nazis take over Soviet Union, it's way too big of a threat afterwards. They can't let that happen. So Normandy was inevitable, right? Doesn't matter which strategy Hitler chooses. The way he started war, the Germany being center of the Europe like that, fighting from all fronts, no way he could have won, right? World War II was doomed for the Nazis to begin with.
This is another one I saw a lot. Just don't invade the Soviet Union, or just don't declare war on the United States. And although these comments are puzzling on the surface, as removing a major combatant redefines what the war is, and you are now describing how to win a smaller conflict, there are reasons this doesn't work that are all to do with character motivation and why these things were going to happen unless you fundamentally change who the Germans and Hitler were, and then stray into fiction. Let's first start with the Soviet Union. If you read Mein Kampf, don't do it, it's not a very good book, or listen to a lot of Hitler's speeches, both in public and in private, he fixates on this idea of Judeo-Bolshevism, which is a rather outdated term that grew out of the idea of a Jewish conspiracy that had created communism, and the two were the biggest evils facing the Aryan.
There you go, we saw that in Oversimplified, that just, uploaded just 2 hours ago. So no way he was gonna go with communism. He was literally fighting that. That was the Nazism idea at the time.
Nation. There's a whole rabbit hole to go down here with multiple theorists and their ideas, but I'm not gonna go into it here. But that's the basic idea, and Hitler subscribed to it. And the result of this is Hitler's main goal being to destroy the Soviet Union and become the savior of the Aryan people in his eyes, and in the process, wiping out millions of subhuman Slavs and resettle the land with Germans. Hitler saw this as his destiny, meaning he was going to do it at some point, and that this fictitious Hitler that would win World War II by not invading the East is just that, fiction. He ceases becoming the Hitler that we know and that existed, and now we're talking about a made-up story. Now, as to why the Soviet Union was invaded...
This is not just some emperor who wants to take territory, right? This is the guy with certain ideology that he pushed throughout the German people, which he was going to follow through. Not doing certain things implies that he just basically gives up on who he is and from which idea he rose up. That's not going to happen.
when it was comes down to two things: resources and, frankly, paranoia. Germany, as I outlined in my previous video on this, spent a lot of the war with fairly limited oil resources and knew that it couldn't support this attack any later than June of 41 with all the fuel that the battle over Britain was consuming. And even the trade with the Soviet Union would not make up for this deficit. So the High Command felt they had to go in when they did before the army would not be able to move as they needed to finish the campaign by September, the time in which the High Command figured the Soviet Union would collapse in on itself under the weight of the German attack. And I'll point you to David Stayhill again for more information on that. The other aspect was, as I said, paranoia. I've often seen this assertion stated in a different way of, don't break the alliance with the Soviet Union, although I wouldn't even frame the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact as an alliance in the way you think of with the Axis and Allies. The treaty was much more in the vein of, you don't get in our way, we won't get in your way, let's trade some stuff. And it was very...
It was an alliance, it was a temporary thing that let's not kill each other right now. Also, it was a delayed thing.
Easy at many points before and during its existence, becoming most volatile during combat between German and Soviet soldiers during the Poland campaign, after the Germans overran the territory that was designated as theirs and moved into territory promised to the Soviets that actually contained oil fields, making it not very subtle what the Germans were trying to do. Both Stalin and Hitler knew that some form of war was coming, just not when and who would start it, but going out of their way for the most part to not provoke it. And they didn't trust each other whatsoever. Now, I'm not implying any kind of Suvorov preventative...
I'm not gonna lie, that clip right there about Stalin is just very damn creepy because how bad quality of the video it was from the time, obviously. Look at that. It's just creepy.
And they didn't trust each other whatsoever. Now, I'm not implying any kind of Suvorov preventative war type thing. The Soviet Union was refitting and probably wouldn't be ready for a large war until at least mid-1942, but with these two ideologically opposing powers taking territory so quickly right next to each other, it was something that was bound to happen as soon as one of them felt they were in a position to make the first move. By 1941, the Germans felt they were, and they took the opportunity. For more on this, and the German-Soviet clashings in Poland, I'll point you towards Stephen Kotkin's second book in his Stalin series, or this video of him talking about it. The declaration of war on the US is...
I love all the people in the comments that, criticize lots of things that he said, are just saying things what they're feeling. While this guy, the guy from Potential History, actually reads book that people, smart people, historian wrote, and he actually, reads all that book, and from there he comes to this conclusion. But people in the comments just saying what they're feeling. This is the battle right now.
Is a bit more tricky, especially given that Hitler was aware of the industrial capacity of the nation. However, he saw the US as very internally focused and figured that it would take them much longer to mobilize than it did. Hitler always planned for war with the United States, as outlined in his second book, written but not published in 1928, but wanted to put it off until he was ready, often skipping on details about how it would be done. He began...
Look, United States during the World War II was not the same United States that was during the World War I. After World War I, US bolstered up lots of things, right? During the World War II, United States was not as it is today, the military part that we know of today. If, today Hitler rises up and all this happens, the battle finishes pretty damn quickly because of how US is today, right? But then again, World War II basically helped US's economy in that sense. But the point is, during the World War II, US's economy was great even before World War I, right? They were really in strategic place and all the resources they had. Their economy was already great. When it comes to military, they were not that powerful during the World War I. But during the after World War I finishes, they realized that how, there could be a global war like that and we could be screwed basically. So they really bolstered up their military and everything. During the World War II, they were no joke, right? So, after all are defeated, after Russia, Soviet Union is defeated, Britain, I don't see it how, because as soon as the attack on Britain starts, United States will claim that it's attack on them. Because after Soviet Union falls, if only Britain is left, United States will basically panic, like we are the only one left afterwards. So US would not let Britain fall, right? So US and Britain would have always attacked together. So I don't see Nazi winning even there, even if it's only Britain and United States left. I mean, it would be immense battle, immense war, pretty damn bloody war than it already was. It would be ridiculous scales, but I still see Nazis losing.
Began to assume that, due to some anti-German sentiments from Roosevelt, the Americans would declare war in 1942, coming to the aid of the Allies like they did in World War I. Piggybacking off the previous statements about the Soviets, he figured he could end the war in the East and turn and fight the West. This feeling ended, though, as the Soviet campaign continued to drag on and 1942 loomed. The German Navy had been...
Well, that is Napoleon or Hitler. Yeah, I think I'm gonna be quick in the east, then I'll begin attacking west. Soviet Union and Russia will fall like that. Yeah, sure.
asking for war with the United States for some time, as Hitler had been holding them back to not provoke them, knowing that going against the US Navy, the Kriegsmarine would come up lacking. Hitler's solution to this was Japan, which had a large navy that he thought could tie up the Americans until he was done in Russia, then turn westward and save his plan. He constantly reassured the Japanese that Germany would throw in with them if they expanded their territory south into US-held islands. This was among many attempts to get Germany and Japan to fight the same enemy, which also included trying to get Japan to invade the Soviet Union from the east in June. Although Japan kept Hitler in the dark as to when they were going to attack, Hitler was very pleased when they did and immediately lifted all restrictions on his navy to attack US ships, and later declared war a few days later after his foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, said, "A great power does not allow itself to be declared war upon, it declares war on others." Now, this decision may have been flawed with the hindsight of putting too much faith in the Japanese Navy and underestimating the US's ability to fight on two fronts and mobilize so quickly, but knowing that Hitler did plan to fight the US way back in the 20s, the timing may be bad given what we know now, but it was not something that he was just not going to do, in the same way he was not going to just opt out of invading the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
This is the one that I see the most. Take the British out before...
This guy is killing Hitler over and over again with that clip. I just...
This is the one that I see the most. Take the British out before you turn east. As if it was that simple. The Germans tried this. First by attempting to bomb the British into submission, which didn't work, and second by planning the invasion of the British home island in an operation named Sea Lion. This was going to be the amphibious assault that would take Britain out of the war, and plans were drawn up and early preparations were made. But before going through with it, the Germans themselves realized this wasn't going to work and cancelled it. The short answer for why is the Royal Navy and the inability of the Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe to control the channel. The German Navy would be unable to keep the channel clear of British warships to enable troops and supplies to reach the British coast unless the Army's landing was on a very narrow front, resulting in less water needing to be covered. Knowing the coast was going to be heavily defended, the Army rejected this plan as they would need a wide landing front so they were not just feeding men into a meat grinder. In short, the Germans did not have the material to carry out a successful landing without it either
There you go, that's the Britain sentence right there. You know, what happened if Germany takes on Britain and try to invade it? Germany sends in soldiers into the meat grinder. That's what that is. Britain being an island, that has been their power for centuries. They are an island, they have a powerful navy, they'll be there ready for it on the beaches, basically. Anybody comes, it's a meat grinder. They would basically crush them. It's not easy to invade Britain. And Britain has been one of the most powerful empires ever before this. Even if they were not that during this point, somebody who was one of the most powerful empire of all time is not just going to fall down, especially when they have this kind of a geographical, edge, basically.
Bogging down and being cut off on the ground, or being simply sunk on the way to its destination. In the 70s, the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst wargamed the scenario with conditions favorable to the Germans, and came up with the operation being a total failure. Some commenters have gone as far as to suggest using paratroopers to take the British down, but I think you need to only look as far as Crete and Arnhem to see how badly an unsupported airborne operation can go.
Yeah,
the Germans would still have to land by sea to resupply them and get relief troops on the ground, and the Royal Navy was too large an obstacle to allow this to happen, even by the Germans' own admission.
Paratrooper works at certain operation if you want it to succeed, sure, but whole invasion, yeah, that doesn't work.
One particular comment out of all of them really stood out to me. It began with, "If the Nazis weren't Nazis, they would have won." And I think this really speaks to the core of my point. Alternative history is fun. It makes for good Hoi 4 games. But when really talking about it seriously, it's really hard to come by any academic...
Yeah, if Nazis were Nazis, they would have won, right? If Hitler wasn't a Nazi, they would have won. If United States didn't exist, they would have won. If Soviet Union were not there and they were just nomadic people, unorganized, they would have won. Yeah, let's just create more and more scenarios, why not?
Conclusions outside of a few days of speculation, because you begin building assumption on assumption on assumption, and before you know it, you have changed the motivations and decision-making patterns of everybody you're talking about, and you are then just writing fan fiction.
This is your brain.
This is your brain on.
Alternative history.
Would Germany have won World War II if the Nazis weren't in power? Maybe. But it's also equally likely they wouldn't have started the war, or joined the Allies, or anything else. If there's no basis in reality to do with
Look, if Nazis were Nazis, there would have been, basically revolt at certain level, because German people were angry with because of Treaty of Versailles, what was happening. There would have been uprising, revolt, massive issues, and then there would have been some discussion, some more treaties, and there it would have ended. Because of the ideology of Nazi, it was this big of a deal, right? If Nazis were Nazis, there wouldn't have been this large of a war. Maybe some war here and there, but not the World War.
the people you were talking about in your assumption, what's the point? Germany decided to start a war.
It's Hitler's a-holeness that started the war. Hitler came up with Volkswagen, right? Volkswagen, like, I'm going to give all of my German people a car if they just pitch in certain money every month. Where he never wanted to create a car. He just wanted to use that money to create tanks and airplanes and things like that. That was Hitler's idea, Hitler being an a-hole. Without Hitler and Nazi, that doesn't happen. Resources, where do they get resources after, Treaty of Versailles and everything? Everybody's eyes on the Germany. Hitler was being really a-hole and clever. And Nazi ideology, that what pushed them. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been this large scale of war.
Within a little over 2 years, would see them taking on 3 superpowers at once, with the resources of most of the world behind them. Add in strategic mistakes and intelligence failures, it paints a very grim picture from the start, regardless of decisions made after the fact. Speaking of intelligence failures, don't let your private information go the way of the German armies. There are plenty of Alan Turings out there looking for information and private data that do not have the same honor and duty to country that the original did. If you're like me, you probably forget and end up reusing your password for the sake of convenience. But when you do that, it's like using the same codebooks over and over.
Yeah, people, go to daslan.com/potential history and support this channel. This is the best video I've seen about why Germany can never win, because all the videos I've been watching about World War II, if there is one type of thing that I've reacted to and watched in past 1.5 years since my channel started, I had to delete lots of the previous videos, but if one thing I've been reacting to and watching is World War II and history around World War II, right? And even I came to the conclusion, without having that much detail, that there is no scenario where Germany wins, because they were just attacking everybody. It's just, Occam's razor, simplicity. Let's just think without too much complication. Germany was basically fighting every superpower from all sides. That never works. No one in ever history has ever done that and be successful. Great people have seen like this is not going to work, even in the Romans' time, that this is not going to work, and they make treaties here and there to secure one side so they can fight in the other side. You can't fight from all fronts. That never works. Alright, well, that was Germany Could Not Win World War II Part 2 by the channel Potential. This is great channel. If you want me to react to any other video from this channel, I guess comment down. And yeah, if you like my reaction, don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the reaction. There's a link in the description. Check out the Castle playlist I created for all my reaction for different channels and things. Check out the end cards, and yeah, I'll see you next time.